In the 1950s, near the Californian desert, there's a company town called Victory, where happy families live seemingly perfect lives. Every morning, the husbands leave for work at Victory headquarters outside town, while the wives stay behind, taking care of the house and practicing ballet under their instructor, Shelley. The wives aren't allowed to ask any questions about their husband's work, and visiting headquarters is strictly forbidden. One of these happy couples is Alice and Jack, who have an active intimate life and love throwing parties, especially with Alice's best friend, Bunny, and her husband. Alice and Jack also share a favorite song that Alice often hums while doing her chores. Occasionally, the entire town shakes for a few seconds. Alice asks Jack if it has anything to do with Victory's projects, but he refuses to answer, and she quickly drops the subject. One afternoon, after ballet class, Bunny and Alice watch a group of men in red jumpsuits help their new neighbor move in. As they gossip, they notice their friend Margaret is absent from class. Unsurprising, since she has become an outcast after a mysterious incident. Later, Alice is in her garden when she spots Margaret standing in her backyard, holding a toy plane with her eyes closed, seemingly having a strange vision of a pair of eyes staring at her in the dark. Unsure of what to make of it, Alice ignores her. While preparing dinner, Alice notices something bizarre. All the eggs in her carton are empty. But before she can process it, she gets distracted as her food begins to burn in the oven. A few days later, Alice attends a pool party at Shelley's house, humming her usual song. Bunny suddenly asks her to stop, saying she's tired of hearing it. That's when Alice realizes she doesn't even know what song it is, yet it's always been stuck in her head. As the melody lingers in her mind, strange images flash before her eyes, but Bunny distracts her before she can make sense of them. The party takes a turn when Shelley's husband, Frank, the CEO of Victory, welcomes the new neighbors with a speech. But it's abruptly interrupted by Margaret, who cryptically asks why they're here when they shouldn't be. Her husband quickly drags her away, making the atmosphere tense. To regain control, Frank reminds everyone that they are changing the world by building a town based on safety and order. Later, Alice checks on Margaret and finds her husband giving her some kind of medicine. Margaret tries to tell Alice that she isn't okay, that she has nightmares, and that they are hiding her. But before Alice can ask anything, Margaret's husband shuts the door in her face. The next day, Alice and her friends go shopping when the topic of Margaret comes up. They whisper about how she's been acting strange ever since the accident, but Bunny corrects them. It wasn't an accident. Margaret had broken the only rule by wandering deep into the desert with her son, claiming she saw something. When they found her, she was alone, holding his toy plane. Her son was never found, though Margaret insists they took him as punishment. Their conversation is interrupted when the ground shakes again, but no one reacts. They're used to it. That night, Alice starts having bizarre dreams that linger in her mind the next day. Needing fresh air, she takes the trolley, but instead of getting off at the mall, she stays to admire the desert view, something the driver finds odd. Suddenly, a plane, identical to Margaret's toy, appears in the sky, crashing into the desert. There's never been a plane flying in this area before. Alice insists they check it out in case someone needs help, but the driver refuses. It's against the rules. Determined, Alice ignores the rules and walks deep into the desert, eventually reaching a hill with a spiral road leading to the top. At the summit, she finds a mysterious dome. Calling out for help, she hears nothing. Despite her fear, she reaches out and touches the glass. Instantly, a violent force surges through her, throwing her head back as disturbing images flash in her mind. Frank's voice echoes, speaking about leaving chaos behind. Then she blinks. Suddenly, she's back home, lying in bed. Confused and terrified, Alice stumbles to the kitchen, where Jack is cooking. He explains he didn't wake her up because she had already been home when he arrived. But Alice has no memory of returning. When she mentions the plane crash, Jack dismisses it. There was no crash, otherwise the whole town would be talking about it. Alice grows frustrated, blaming her imagination, and Jack distracts her with playful jokes. The next day, while cleaning, Alice suddenly feels the wall behind her move, pressing her against the glass window. She panics, struggling to push back, then blinks. The wall is back to normal. Just a hallucination. At that moment, the phone rings. It's Margaret. She cryptically asks if Alice saw it, insisting that they are lying and they need to leave. Alice, overwhelmed, snaps that she isn't crazy and hangs up. But the words haunt her. During her next ballet class, Alice is horrified to see her reflection change. It's Margaret. At first, Margaret mimics her movements, but suddenly, she starts slamming her head against the mirror. Alice screams in terror. The others don't see anything, and when Alice turns back, Margaret is gone. Rushing home, Alice spots Margaret standing on her roof. She cries out, begging her to stop, but Margaret doesn't respond. Then, Margaret jumps. Alice panics, trying to reach her, but before she can take more than a few steps, the men in red appear, dragging Margaret's body away. That evening, Alice tells Jack what happened, but he refuses to believe her. Margaret's husband claims she's fine, saying she simply fell while cleaning the windows. Everyone believes it was just an accident. Alice is furious. She hates being treated like she's crazy. Desperate for the truth, she demands Jack tell her what he really does at work, what Victory is actually hiding. But Jack snaps, yelling that questioning things could cost them everything, their home, their life together. He begs her to let it go and storms out. That night, Alice, too unsettled to sleep, turns on the TV. Suddenly, another hallucination takes over. She's drowning. It feels just like when the wall pressed against her. Then she blinks. She finds herself standing in front of the window. The next morning, Alice, still dazed, wraps up the dinner leftovers. But something is wrong. She suddenly loses control of her hands as they start wrapping her own body instead. Alice snaps out of it after a few seconds, removes the wrap, and takes a deep breath, finally accepting she's losing it. Moments later, Jack brings Dr. Collins for a checkup. The doctor assumes it's just stress from witnessing Margaret's fall. When Alice tries to explain what really happened, Collins insists that grief can distort reality. Alice then notices Collins has classified files about Margaret in his briefcase. Curious, she asks what happened to her. Collins explains Margaret suffered from paranoia and outbursts, making it impossible for her husband to work. As a result, he was fired, and Margaret was sent elsewhere for treatment. After Collins leaves, he forgets his briefcase. As soon as Jack steps out, Alice rushes to search for clues, but before she can, Collins returns to retrieve it. She quickly hands it over, pretending she was just about to give it back. Luckily, he believes her. Once he leaves, it's revealed that Alice managed to steal Margaret's files, but all the pages are blacked out. Frustrated, she burns them in the fireplace while drinking whiskey to drown her guilt. Later, while taking a bath, Alice's mind drifts again, making her see disturbing images. This time, she also sees tender moments of a couple embracing. She snaps out of it when Jack comes home and plays music. Still shaken, she watches as Jack suddenly asks if they should have a baby. Alice promises to think about it. That evening, they attend a fancy party hosted by Frank. Alice notices him watching her while discussing something with Collins. Feeling uneasy, she starts breaking down as a dancer performs a routine that eerily resembles her visions. Tears stream down her face as she begs Jack to take her home, but he ignores her because Frank is about to make an announcement. To everyone's surprise, Frank calls Jack on stage and announces his promotion. The room erupts in celebration, but for Alice, it's the final push. She rushes to the bathroom, where she sees another vision of the mysterious couple. Bunny enters to check on her, but when Alice tries to explain everything, Bunny cuts her off. She scolds Alice for breaking the rules and accuses her of trying to ruin Jack's big night. She tells Alice to pull herself together and be a good wife. With no choice, Alice forces herself back into the routine, trying to forget everything. A few days later, Jack hosts a dinner party with Frank and Shelley as guests. During dinner, Alice sits at the head of the table instead of letting Jack take the spot, wanting to face Frank directly. As the small talk begins, she interrupts, questioning the guests about their past lives before coming to Victory. She points out that their backstory seems scripted, as if they were told what to remember to forget the truth, like what happened to Margaret. Jack tries to stop her, but Frank urges her to continue. Taking the opportunity, Alice exposes everything she's seen, accusing Frank of lying to everyone to build his perfect world. Frank remains calm and turns the situation against her, claiming she's suffering from the same psychosis as Margaret. He even insinuates that Alice has been in his bedroom. The guests grow uncomfortable, and Shelley snaps, accusing Alice of insulting her husband before storming out. One by one, the guests follow, leaving Alice and Jack alone. Jack, frustrated, accuses Alice of ruining his big night. Furious, Alice assures him that wasn't her intention. She insists Jack is more important to her than Victory and begs him to leave before it destroys them. After relentless begging, Jack finally gives in and agrees to run away together. Alice wastes no time, packing only the essentials before rushing to the car. Just as she gets in, Jack shocks her by suddenly apologizing. Before she can process it, the men in red arrive and drag her away. Jack breaks down in tears as he hears his wife's desperate cries for help. Alice is taken to the hospital for electroshock therapy. Her body aches, but as the treatment intensifies, she starts seeing visions again, this time realizing they are memories of her real life. She and Jack had been living in modern times, humming that annoying song. Jack had lost his job, but Alice, a doctor, reassured him she'd take extra shifts at the hospital to support them. However, working double shifts drained her, and Jack did nothing to help. He didn't even bother making dinner. Instead, he sulked when Alice was too exhausted for intimacy. Frustrated, Jack spent his nights listening to Frank's podcast, which promoted a philosophy where men could reclaim their true selves from a society that oppressed them. Sometime later, Alice wakes up back in Victory's hospital. Collins declares she's been fixed, and she's sent home to resume her old routine as if nothing happened. Days pass quietly until one evening, Jack returns from work humming that familiar song. That's when the truth hits. Her visions were real. Jack had applied to be part of the Victory Project, where he could choose the perfect life. He had gained access to a special machine that kept Alice connected to a 24/7 simulation. In reality, she was trapped, just like all the other wives. The husbands only logged into Victory for a few hours each day, disconnecting when they left for work in the real world. Meanwhile, Jack had to care for Alice's real body and work a low-paying job to afford the simulation. The memories overwhelm Alice, and she collapses in pain. Desperate for answers, she demands an explanation from Jack. He immediately gets defensive, yelling that he did it so they could be happy because their real lives had been miserable. But Alice doesn't see it that way. He stole her autonomy and gaslit her into believing she was insane. When she asks about the other wives and their children, Jack admits the kids aren't real. They're just part of the simulation. Jack falls to his knees, sobbing, and clings to Alice so tightly she struggles to breathe. Fed up with his lies, she grabs a glass and smashes it over his head, knocking him out. What she doesn't know is that dying in Victory means dying in real life too. At that moment, Bunny bursts into the house, having heard the commotion. She quickly covers Jack's body and tries to calm Alice down. When Alice frantically explains everything, Bunny admits she already knew. She chose to stay in the simulation because it was the only way to be with her children after they died in real life. However, she warns Alice that she must leave. Jack can no longer disconnect her from the machine. She has to reach the headquarters and do it herself. Terrified but determined, Alice runs outside. As streetlights begin exploding, the other women start sensing something is wrong, while the men focus on finding Jack and stopping Alice. Bunny shoves them away, giving Alice a chance to jump into a car and speed off just as the men in red arrive. They hijack cars and give chase. The pursuit intensifies through the streets, but Alice manages to escape town. In the desert, however, the men in red start ramming her car. Dr. Collins also joins in, accelerating to block her path. Finding herself surrounded, Alice swerves at the last second, causing Collins and the others to crash into each other. Back at home, Frank receives word of Collins' death. The call is on speaker, so Shelley overhears everything. While Frank is busy barking orders, Shelley calmly walks up to him and stabs him, declaring, "It's my turn now." Meanwhile, Alice continues driving until she reaches the hill leading to headquarters. But her car gets stuck on a sharp turn. Refusing to give up, she jumps out and sprints up the hill, hoping the wreckage will slow her pursuers. Unfortunately, the men in red abandon their vehicles and start climbing after her. Pushing her body to its limit, Alice forces herself to keep running. At the top, she sees the glass dome. Suddenly, she hallucinates Jack embracing her, begging her to stay. Memories of their real life flash through her mind. But then, the men in red appear behind her, snapping her back to reality. Remembering what she must do, Alice sprints forward, presses her hands against the glass, and throws her head back as a flood of memories and disturbing images consume her. Then, everything goes black. Alice gasps. So that's it. Hope you enjoy the story. Subscribe and press the bell icon for more videos.